Hi, I'm Mary Elizabeth Williams, and this is Patient. My guest today is Devon O'Neil. He is the author of an absolutely gripping, fascinating, edge of your seat new book. I know that phrase gets turned around a lot, but it really is true. It's called The Way Out, a true story of survival in the heart of the Rockies. It is about survival. It is also about grief, about secrets, about what happens in the aftermath of some of the worst things imaginable. And we're going to get into all of it, right?
Absolutely.
So I don't want to reveal too much about what happens ultimately to these characters, these real people in this book. But why don't you start us out by telling us a little of the background of this story?
Yeah, there's a lot to it, of course, but it began as a backcountry ski trip to a cabin at about 11,300 feet in the Colorado Rockies near a town called Leadville. And these three families, so three dads and their four teenage kids between them, went for a 2-night trip. This cabin is very rustic. It's in the middle of the Sawatch Range, and there's no, you know, it's off the grid. It's you poop in pit toilets. It's in the backcountry. It's in the wilderness, and it's a beautiful place. And this is why people go there to get away. And these three families, the three dads, were all really well known, prominent members of the community. One was a family physician who had delivered more than 500 babies in the town where they were all from, which is Salida. It's a 5,000 person town at about 7,000 feet elevation, known as the Heart of the Rockies. And another dad was a former monk who became an elementary school principal in Salida, and he was also a licensed counselor. And then the third dad, who kind of joined the trip at the last minute to spend time with his 15-year-old daughter who was going on the trip. He was a long time and really legendary U.S. Forest Service ranger who oversaw recreational amenities throughout the Arkansas River Valley where they lived. And yeah, they all went up to this hut. And the first morning they were there, the forest ranger, Brett Beasley, and the son of the family physician, whose name was Cole. So Brett and Cole ducked out, excuse me, for a quick ski run. And they didn't tell anybody. They expected to be gone for maybe 20 minutes or a half hour at most while everybody else was finishing breakfast and getting geared up. And they never returned. And some of their friends and family went out and tried to find them, followed their tracks, and ultimately did not find them. And they never came back to the hut that afternoon as everyone had planned. And so the rest of the party at the hut kind of sounded the alarm and called 911. And the local search and rescue team started organizing a search, as did the friends and family of those who were missing. And it kind of, and then a massive storm blew in. It dropped about 3 feet of snow, almost a meter of snow overnight near this hut. And it was an atmospheric river with moisture coming in off the Pacific Ocean. And the next day, dozens and dozens of searchers were out scouring the wilderness in this blizzard looking for them. And about 27 hours after they had left the hut, an X Games champion snowmobiler, who I used to cover when I worked for ESPN, he found them separated in this drainage that was a couple, 2 or 3 miles from the hut. And they had gotten lost and disoriented, and one lived and the other died. And it was both miraculous that one of them survived and absolutely tragic that one perished. And the survivor, much of this book delves into the plight of a lone survivor. And it's something that is really difficult to comprehend without having ever been through that experience. And there's enormous survivor's guilt, understandably. And so this survivor did not tell anyone his full story. He was just traumatized from the experience, and he did not tell his full story for 5 years, actually, and until I interviewed him. And that conversation really opened the door to a story that you kind of couldn't make up. It's a really unique adventure saga, and then there is the aftermath of living in a small town. The community was haunted by this event, and really gutted by it as well. There was something of a winning family and a losing family, and there was grief and trauma and just utter mourning for a long time, and there was never really closure like you often find in the wake of a backcountry accident where we know exactly what happened. So, my hope in telling this is that there can be some closure for those affected by this. And there was never really a ton of group debriefing either, just because the outcome was so fraught. And these kids, they were in their teens and they had to kind of become adults over the years with this haunting event kind of hovering over their growth. And yeah, just there's a lot of reporting on adolescence and dealing with grief as an adolescent, as well as everybody went through some kind of hell. And actually, the title of the book, The Way Out, not only refers to Brett and Cole trying to find a way out once they got lost, find a way out of this drainage that they got lost in, Porcupine Gulch. But also, everybody really was trying to find their own way out. And grief, as you know, is idiosyncratic, and there's really no blueprint on how to get through it. And so it was a very personal struggle for everybody. And after through the years, I got to spend time with everybody who had really been deeply impacted by this, and they all went through amazing lows, and they're incredible people, super inspiring, but they've been through it, and they shared a lot of that with me in terms of how they dealt, and some went to therapy and some didn't. Some kind of retreated into their own consciousness and tried to process everything through that manner.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I wanted to talk to you. That's why I wanted this conversation because this to me is a book very much about how we deal with things that seem bigger than our own imaginations. And there is a part in the book where one person says to another, just be prepared. People say stupid things, which feels like one of the best things you can tell someone who is grieving. Talk to me about what these families went through, what they experienced. There was online harassment. There was a gamut of people wanting to know too much, people not talking at all. Talk to me a little bit about how this community responded. This community that had already, for a small community, been so devastated by death when we come into the story.
Absolutely. There's a whole chapter on that in the middle of the book because it is a backdrop. There was a lot of parent death, not just death, but parent death in this community. There was one friend group of 10 girls who had grown up together, and by the time they got out of high school, six of those 10 had lost a parent. And, I obviously did some research to contextualize that. And in general, in the US, one in, I believe it's 12 or 13 kids will lose a parent by the time they become adults. And so this is just astronomically a higher rate than that. And the causes were bizarre, everything from rare cancers to suicide to, cardiac arrest on a trail or something. And yet that was the backdrop for this incident, the accident that is the spine of the book. And so the community had been through it, and there were other moms or spouses or siblings who had been through some version of just devastation. And there was a touch of support network, but you know, as these folks described to me, when you're in it, no one else can understand really. Of course, if another person has been through something similar, yes, they do understand much better than someone who hasn't. However, each event is just so personal and again, just idiosyncratic, and there isn't this tried and true way. Okay, here's what you do first, here's what you do second. However, that quote that you brought up a second ago, that did come from somebody who had been through something similar. And it's really tricky because often people who are on the periphery of something really traumatic or tragic want to be there for the person who's going through it, or the people who are going through it now, but they don't know what to say. And I've been through this as someone on that periphery, as well as just through journalism, heard the stories. And yet, so often they don't say anything and they don't engage. And then you talk to the person who is grieving, and they're like, gosh, all I wanted was some sort of acknowledgement. And so there's kind of like a bit of chicken or the egg, is the grieving person open to some communication? And it's scary to try and support someone who's grieving, but also at the same time, like, you don't want to say the wrong thing. You don't want to intrude in some ways. And so sometimes, yeah, people don't say anything. And then that's actually kind of worse. So there's no easy answer to that, but yeah, absolutely. There were everybody wanted to support everybody who was traumatized by this event, and yet you sometimes don't know how.
Well, you
And
say
so,
everyone, but it's a little more complicated than that in this story, which I think is important to talk about. You know, you talk about how sometimes it would be like during the day there was this cone of silence and no one would talk, but then there was also this back channel of gossip going on because there were questions about what had happened and this kind of dual story that was going on at the same time that the people who were most intimately involved knew about, saw happening in front of them. And there was online harassment. There were people making accusations about what the parents could have done, what the kids could have done, what really happened. Obviously, in the aftermath of a tragedy like that, there's blame. And there was certainly blame being kicked around in this community as well, right?
and well, yeah, I think there were people trying to find a way to rationalize what could have happened.
Hmm.
And so when two go missing and only one lives, there, I'm sure, were folks who were like, well, it must have been that survivor's fault. And the survivor spoke to me about that feeling of like, if I lived and my partner that day didn't, then it must have been my fault. What could I have done differently? And he was trying to find again a way to like come to terms with the outcome. Why did I live? And he didn't. And, those on the outside looking in without a clear explanation of all the facts certainly hypothesized of what could have, must have happened in some ways. And yeah, there were conversations that took place in garages or on bar stools. And I think that's just the way our brains work. Sometimes we need to find a why. And there was this real poignant conversation I had at one point with Chuck, who was the monk turned elementary principal, and he said, there's often not a why, and yet we search and we search, and it just consumes us sometimes. But his daughter just in a completely unrelated incident, she'd been jogging and an owl came down and attacked her from above on her head, and maybe it was drawn by her bouncing ponytail or something, but he was like, my daughter was trying to figure out, why did this owl attack me? And he's like, who knows? It's an owl. It's a wild animal. Who knows? We don't know how they think or why they do everything that they do. But his point was, you can't really always find the answer to why, and yet we want to. So that's what was happening in a lot of different places, not just in Salida, but beyond. When someone dies in something like this, the echo is far and wide because we all, or a lot of us, know people far and wide, beyond where we live. And so this accident really did beg a lot of questions. And I viewed that as something that was kind of part of my charge, was to answer some of those questions in the reporting.
And one of the things I think this book does very well, which is a real phenomenon, is it explores, even though you don't use the word secondary grief, because when you lose someone, you lose the things that were attached to them as well. And this community where people are very outdoorsy, People love being in those mountains. People love going skiing. They're very different responses. Some people become more adventurous. Some people become really afraid. Talk to me a little bit about how this kind of loss can impact someone's relation, not just to the person who's gone, but to the world, to the place in the natural world that they hold.
Yeah, that's a good point, and it's a big theme of this book, of the latter half of the book. And that was something that was really interesting to me because I could personally relate to it. This event, because their outing that morning was so benign on the surface, right? Go for a quick ski, 20 minutes, you're back in the hut. You're not intending to go far. You don't take a ton of stuff that you might need if you were planning to be out all day, which they weren't. And yet, that lack of preparation certainly played a role in what happened in the outcome. But because on its face it was so benign, it really caused this reevaluation of everything. I mean, this is a very outdoorsy community. It's surrounded by 14,000-foot peaks. The Arkansas River runs right through downtown Salida. People are there to recreate, to be outside, to, kind of feed their soul in that sense. And I do the same thing where I live in Breckenridge, Colorado, which is about 70 miles north. And I think everyone who had had close calls and lived this way for 20 or 40 years was suddenly like, holy cow, if this could happen to them on such a quick, innocent outing, it can happen to any of us. And we really now need to start checking ourselves and figuring out, is what we're doing safe? Is it responsible? Is it worth it? There's a whole chapter late in the book about, is this worth it? Is the life worth it? Is our daily outing, are our adventures worth it? Because when you see this level of devastation up close, it really changes your worldview. And even through my reporting, it changed mine. And I had a really close call with a massive avalanche while I was reporting this story. And I had two boys at home, ages 4 and 7, and it rocked my world and it made me hate myself for a while. And it helped me at least try to understand on a deeper level what those were dealing with who were impacted by this accident. And so I think that reevaluation, it was kind of a reckoning, as you said, like some people truly, I mean, as one guy said, I couldn't even look at mountains. And people pulled back quite a bit, or they started carrying, tons more survival gear than they ever had before. It really, yeah, did cause some to question everything. And I think that that was pretty poignant and also really important. And it's, the lessons we learn from stuff like this that happens should save us, or at least promote more caution in the future. If we're really not looking away, if you're staring at something like this in the face, which is hard to do because it really it makes you see yourself as much more mortal than we like to see ourselves as sometimes.
And I think it really kind of shifts, it did for me, your understanding of your place in the natural world and that there are forces so much bigger than we are every single day. I want to ask you one more question then about that because you talk about the why, but the big question of this book is it worth it? What's worth it? And I want to know how this book, writing this, getting to know these people, seeing their grief and pain and also their love and support for each other. How has this book changed you, Devon?
Well, it's a fair question. I think it made me reevaluate how I live, and certainly my experience with that avalanche did as well, much more viscerally. But reporting, when you really are allowed into this world that others are living in, it it really worms its way into your brain. And so I, of course, was trying not to look away at any point because you lose some of the power and some of the message by doing that. So I would say reporting this book made me realize that, for instance, just seeing these kids and what they have had to deal with and kind of move through life with. weighing them down. It really, I saw my kids in them, and I saw myself in the parents. And, there are poignant stories out there about what's fair in terms of the adventures that I choose to embark on and what's fair to my loved ones. And so I guess to answer your question, I haven't pursued adventure at a level that carried as much risk as I did before taking on this project. And I still need to be outside every day, and it just feeds me. It really balances my whole world, and it grounds me and centers me and does all the things that time and nature can do for us. But nature can take too, and it doesn't care who you are, how experienced you are, what you had for breakfast, anything. It'll just take. And there are some, there's plenty of quotes out there about that from beautiful writers through the eras. But to me, if you are out in nature for the right reasons, and you to determine what the right reasons are, and these are personal reasons. But for me, I realized that I need to be out there, but I don't need to be risking as much as I have for many, many years. And so I've made that change in my life. And I'm human too. I still wish I could do some of the fun, radical, gripping things that fed me for so many years. And I miss that stuff and I long for it. And yet, I think if you forget what you've learned along the way, then it's on you. And I try not to forget these lessons that have been imparted on me by both my sources and my own experiences. And so, yeah, I think that what's a full life to any of us? That's our own question to answer. So mine has become certainly less thrilling, but I feel more content with the the outcomes and the lower chances of a truly devastating one.
Well, I think this is a book that has the potential to really make us all kind of reevaluate those questions in our lives. Whatever our level of risk and risk aversion is, it really is about what is worth it, how we spend our time, where we want to put our energy, and also, like I said, our relation with the natural world that we all need and does sustain and feed us, but as you said, can also take us. It's a beautiful book. It's a fascinating story. To call it fascinating seems like a disservice to the real people who this is about, but it is a beautifully told story of loss, of grief and of the natural world. Devon O'Neil, congratulations on this achievement, and thank you so much for talking to me today. I very much appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Mary Elizabeth.